Hey y'all, it's Taylor. Today we are going to have a little book talk about this book, Separate is Never Equal, Sylvia Mendez and Her Family's Fight for Desegregation. This is written and illustrated by Duncan Tonatiuh, and this book is set in the 1940s when Sylvia Mendez was moving to Westminster, California, and her dealings with the school desegregation in California at the time. So we're also going to talk about, within this book, critical race theory. And in an article that I have linked to the resource tab to the right, there is an article called Counter Storytelling Through Graphic Life Writing. I highly suggest reading this article after reading this book because it ties in a lot of good talks about racism and desegregation in school systems. So David Gilborn, he is quoted a lot in this article. He says that critical race theorists argue that the majority of racism remains hidden beneath a veneer of normality, and it is only the more crude and obvious forms of racism that are seen as problematic by most people. Children's picture books hide beneath the veneer of normality and often reproduce implicit and explicit misrepresentations about indigenous peoples and people of color. So because of that, it is so important to have books like these and books like this, which I'll talk about in the next book talk, that really bring racism to the forefront of our minds and just how much that this is still relevant in our society. So what we're going to talk about right now, I'm going to show you one image in this book that represents and depicts how Duncan, the author, depicts racism and or stereotypes in this book. So if you turn, I'm going to turn to this page. I don't know if you can see it. This is the specific image that I will be talking about. I'm going to read you this page and what it has to say. One day, a truck driver overheard Mr. Mendez trying to convince a worker to sign his petition. "You know," said the truck driver, "you could file a lawsuit." The truck driver told Mr. Mendez about a lawyer named David Marcus, who had filed a lawsuit on behalf of some people in San Bernardino, sorry for my mispronunciation, and had helped them integrate the public pools there. At that time, not only were schools segregated, but also other public places as well, such as pools, parks, and movie theaters. Some businesses even had signs that read, "No dogs or Mexicans allowed." Mr. Mendez decided right then and there to hire Mr. Marcus, even if it meant having to spend all of his savings to do so. So as you can see, the sign says, "No dogs or Mexicans allowed, public pool." So we are going to discuss how this particular image depicts stereotypes of racism. So in this particular image, all of the white Americans are in the pool having fun, while all the Mexican children are behind bars, which is stated a lot and is kind of a racial stereotype that they may be in more jails. I don't know if that's how Duncan was going, but that's how I kind of took it. And that they're not allowed to have fun, and that they compare dogs and Mexicans to each other. Like, dogs aren't allowed to be there, or Mexicans. Like, they're animals almost. So that is that image. The next image is going to represent refute, confront, or combat racism or stereotype. So I chose this picture right here. This one. And I don't know if you can see that, but that says petition that Mr. Mendez is holding. I'll read you the page. the Mendez family did not give up. Time and time again, Sylvia heard her father talk with coworkers, friends, and other parents. It's not fair that our kids have to go to an inferior school, he said. It's not only the building that's a problem. The teachers at the school don't care about our children's education. They expect them to drop out by 8th grade. How will our children succeed and become doctors, lawyers, or teachers? So Mr. Mendez created a group called the Parents Association of Mexican American Children. He tried to collect signatures for a petition to integrate schools so that all children, regardless of their skin color or background, could have the same opportunities. But every time he asked someone to sign the petition, he would get the same answer. No queremos problemos. We don't want any problems. Many of the parents worked on farms and owned by white families and feared they would lose their jobs if they supported the petition. So, I chose this image to combat racism because Mr. Mendez and his family are standing up for what they believe in and are staying together, see how they're holding hands, and fighting the fight and trying to get others to sign the petition as well, but because a lot of their work is primarily through white people, they fear it. But I chose this picture and I like how they're holding hands and they're all together to try and get people to sign their petition. So that's the image I chose for this. I genuinely love this book. I think it's great that not a lot of people think that there were court cases before the Brown versus Board of Education that combated desegregation in schools. And I love how they talk about, in the end of this book, if you flip to the author's note, always read the author's note. So here's the author's note, and here are pictures of Sylvia Mendez herself and her family and the schools. So I'll read a little snippet. In the 1940s, segregation based on race or national origin was common throughout the United States. The Mendez versus Westminster School District case paved the way for desegregation for schools in America. After the Mendez lawsuit, similar suits were filed and won in Texas and Arizona. In 1954, 7 years after the Mendez victory, the landmark case Brown versus Board of Education desegregated schools in the entire country. So, I think it's great to have this book to talk about, to introduce almost Brown versus Board of Education, because that was a huge court case and it's widely known. But to present it, to start it maybe, to anchor that lesson through this book. Also, it's crazy to think, while I was reading this, I always imagined in my mind that desegregation in schooling would be between the Caucasian race and the African American race. And I never, ever, I mean, I may have questioned it, but I didn't really think about how it would be between the Hispanic race and the Caucasian race. And how it not only affected, like, the civil rights movement did a lot for African Americans' rights. But it also affected other races as well that a lot of people don't teach or don't hear about. And it's important for us to know all sides, because when we think about racism, our minds usually go to the conflict between African Americans and white people. And it's not only that African Americans that are being persecuted. So it's good to have all kinds of talks with your students about all the different kinds of races and how it's not only one race that struggles. So that is my book talk about Separate is Never Equal. I highly recommend it for any age level. It's a great book, and if you want to learn more about it, there are links and resources on my blog. So just scroll through that post and go to the resource page to find tons of more resources. Thanks.